Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Realcomm Live. Now, I'm Howard Berger. I'm going to be filling in for Jim today while he's on vacation. He'll be back next week. So we've got a great show lined up for you today. We're going to get a little technical, into the weeds a little bit on smart building IoT, cloud, and edge compute. What is edge? Why is it different than cloud? What are some of the benefits of edge? Why is it important to a smart building strategy? How do you factor cyber into the process? I promise it's going to be a very informative and educational session. But before I introduce our guest, I just want to put out a quick disclaimer. Now, if you watched the show last week, Jim prefaced the show letting you all know that we've been having some recent issues with the live streaming platform. We're actively working on it, but we still haven't got it completely figured out. And we've been working with the provider to troubleshoot, but there's a chance we may still experience some issues today. This is a live show. I just want to let you know that we are committed to getting it resolved. We want you to have a seamless experience. But meanwhile, I don't want to let minor technical differences or issues stand in the way. So we're soldiering on and hoping everything goes smoothly. But if not, we'll deal with it. And ultimately, we're either going to get it fixed or end up replacing the platform. So with that disclaimer out of the way, I am pleased to bring in our guest, a gentleman I have known for a few years and call a friend, Srini Khandavilli, Director of Smart Building Solution Architecture at Microsoft GWS. Srini, welcome.
Hi, Howard. How are you doing?
I'm well. I got to say, it has been my pleasure to know you and watch your journey evolve over the years. Honestly, folks, there's a handful of folks touching our industry who've seriously moved the needle in smart building technology. And the work I think you've done in particular, some of the breakthroughs you made, are evident in some of the most advanced commercial buildings and projects around the globe. So really glad to have you on the show today. So let's start off. Let's talk a little bit about your smart building journey.
Sure.
Where did I'll start? Let's start from the day you were born to now.
Don't want to go that back, but here's the thing, Howard. First of all, I love your show, right? It brings some of the best ideas. I was looking past Realcomm Live, and before I talk about my journey, I must say your journey has been phenomenal. And it gives us a platform or the ecosystem. I think what's particularly compelling about what you guys do is the ecosystem. It's just not my ideas, right? When you have an ecosystem, you can trade ideas, and ultimately you can move the industry as a whole. For me, that's something very important and aspirational, and I hope I've tried to do part of that in my journey. So essentially, really quick, I'm a tech guy. Right? I'm a tech guy for the first 10, 15 years of my career. But then I wound up in real estate. And honestly, it's been super fun, right? Because when you're part of the business, nothing gets lost in the translation, right? You get to, ultimately, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to optimize business processes, right? We want to optimize and we want to innovate new business processes. So while as an Intel, as part of real estate there, I implemented the first smart building for Intel. And looking back, it seemed a big leap at that time, but now in the context of today, it was a starting, right? And post that, what was interesting is the journey continued with regards to, we started off with assets, then we went to space planning, then we got into employee experience. Right. And then I got an opportunity to move to Microsoft and be part of the Center of Innovation Group. This is again within the GWS, which is the Global Workplace Solutions Group. And the group in itself is chartered with driving the campus modernization, driving the strategy, the technology, and essentially being that guiding light for the implementation. So truly privileged to be part of this group, given the fact that the size of the opportunity is so large. Portfolio of 600 buildings. So it's not small. It's pretty big. And the wonderful aspect of this, the two aspects, is the fact that we have great leadership, right? Right up from my manager, Emmanuel Daniel, all the way up till Michael Ford, who really invested in modernizing the campus, not just the East Campus, which gets a lot of press, but also the larger portfolio. And the other fun aspect of my job is being able to take the best of Microsoft Azure and plugging it into our solution. So my job within GWS really is around technical architecture, the very core technical piece of being able to help drive a solution that right sizes the edge with the cloud and helps deliver some of the employee experiences that we want to. So long story.
Looking at the evolution of the story. So started years back. At Microsoft campus when we met Daryl Smith, and that whole 88 acres story started evolving. And Daryl was very close and connected to the Realcomm community, created a lot of connections. Really, that story became kind of pretty much front and center. Oh, there I am. Okay. I mean, everything that we learned from that, and then with your evolution over at Intel, I mean, with the SRS, it was a SRR3 and the SR4 projects, Bangalore, and the Petah Tikva projects, which, in my opinion, at that time that was probably around 2016 to 2018, around that time period. All of the IoT learnings that evolved being applied to this huge Microsoft campus project. It just seems like the story has blossomed tremendously.
Absolutely. I mean, I think from the perspective of where we were initially, right? I mean, it's just that evolution from assets to space to employee experience. And actually, first, it's a very, life is full circle, right? We started off at the edge. We went to the cloud, and to reference Petah Tikva, it was the first implementation where I worked with Microsoft fairly, and at that time I was not associated with Microsoft.
So that's where you were really introduced to Azure?
Absolutely. That's the first place I was introduced to Azure. And we went to the cloud. And now that I'm back at Microsoft, what we're trying to do is right size the edge with the cloud, right? And there's definitely, that exercise will lead at a high level business benefit to corporations. I think oftentimes people really associate Microsoft with the cloud, but we also have edge components, right? And I think that's the fun thing of working for a company like this, who's really thinking in terms of, how can we help the customer? I mean, the mission statement of Microsoft is amazing, right? How can we help the customer achieve the best from their implementations? And there's a place for both. And we can, if you want, I can elaborate on how I believe the edge can help in smart building implementations.
Well, let's do that, but let's just back up a little bit. I mean, for the folks who are still getting familiar with some of these terms, could you define edge and the relationship?
Yeah.
And the relationship between edge, cloud, IoT, and what a balanced and right sizing edge and cloud look like, and we can use that as a starting point, and then
sure. That's why I love these conversations, man. You keep me honest, because when you're associated with the domain, you just fling around these terms, and it's part of your daily ritual. But it's a great question. What is the edge, right? I mean, what constitutes the edge? Now, the true edge are the sensors, right? Or the BMS. So as the smart building ecosystem has matured, we move from just optimizing the BMS to having a bunch of sensors, whether it be people occupancy, desk occupancy, indoor air quality, the whole gamut, right? Those now are becoming part of the smart building story. those kind of represent the true edge, but that's typically not where the compute happens, right? In some cases it might, but typically not. Now, where does the compute, or what is our definition of the edge? Our definition of the edge is that aggregation point, in most cases a gateway, which not only brings in the data from these multitude of sources, but it also enables the compute of that data. It's not just a pass-through point to the cloud, right? Because as we all know, I mean, sending all the data to the cloud would be an expensive exercise, right? Now, the cloud definitely has a story. It's I don't believe that, you know, we should do the entire compute on the edge, but now we get into the right sizing, right? What can we do in terms of things at the edge versus in the cloud? Let's take a look at that. If I were doing heavy compute of an AI ML algorithm that, or I wanted to actually learn an algorithm, I would definitely do it in the cloud. It doesn't make sense to do that on the edge, right? If I'm working with much smaller data sets, right, and I wanted fast reaction to that data set, I would love to compute that and create an actuation back to the building from the edge. Why do I need to do a server round trip, right? So at a high level, you have sensors, you have gateway, which is edge, or also something that people call fog computing, and then you have the cloud, right? And that balance of the edge to the cloud is key, because it not only yields basic benefit of network and, you know, network optimization or computer optimization. I think there are a host of other benefits to be had, and yeah, so that's my stance on it.
You know, so this might be a good. Let's take 1 minute. This is a good point to take a little 1 minute break. Introduce our technology partner, Kohn Resnick. So, and then we'll be right back. And now we're back. Let's bring Srini back. There you are. So yeah, I think that was a good start. I know there's still a lot of confusion out there in the industry. People aren't trying to understand. I mean, these cloud and edge have evolved so quickly, and you know, especially with products like Azure, the IoT, the cloud, IoT cloud, which have matured. You know, really quickly, the bundles of services, the things that now the industry is able to do has progressed dramatically over the last 12 to 18 months. I know there are a lot of different approaches. I'm just going to wrap up on IoT and edge. There are a lot of different approaches to IoT strategies. What if a building owner is considering a smart building architecture in terms of IoT, edge, and cloud? Is there anything they should focus specifically on to get it right?
Yeah, it's a great great question. I think I'll break it up into two parts. First, the why. Why should they focus? What's the business problem we're trying to solve here, right? And then I want to talk a little bit about how we went about solving that, right? Get real about it. I mean, oftentimes we talk about these great ideas, but we never really see an instance of that being solved.
And you guys are doing that at Microsoft right now.
We're doing that. I'm super excited. I'm pumped about that.
Yeah.
So with regards to pure strategy, right? If you, especially true for large buildings, large portfolios like Microsoft, but even small portfolios, what do we want to do? We want to make sure we're not locked in to a particular vendor, right? How do we create an architecture that enables us to swap out these things? If you have a portfolio even of 20 buildings, I would bet that you'd have 3 BMSs there, right? At least, if not more. How do I make sure that I can get data out of these buildings, right? And how do I prevent that lock-in? Because otherwise my architecture becomes super complicated. I want to be able to not only reduce the cloud computing costs, but I also want to reduce the cloud-to-cloud integrations, right? Because that's pretty complex.
Yeah, it demands a lot of resources.
The point of this exercise is reducing the time to value. Yeah. I mean, how do I make this idea, this smart building idea, propel much faster
and be sustainable
instead of such a large time to deploy these things? Yeah, exactly, right? I want to onboard buildings faster, right? I want to make sure that today cyber is such a big deal, right? How do I make sure that my strategy is really fixing the cyber problem, right?
Yep.
And finally, about data ownership, when you start seeing, and this goes back to the cloud-to-cloud integration, this is great. We have 10 different vendors who have different sensor solutions. All of them are sending it to their cloud. Oh man, I gotta integrate with all of these guys, and I don't even have access to my data, right? In many cases, I'm getting a subset of my data. So how do I, if this is my data, how do I retain ownership of that? So that's those are kind of some of the aspirational things that I would, if I were driving strategy, or when, I drive the technical strategy, not so much the business strategy within the group, but when I talk with the business partners and, I talk to my manager, his manager, we all combine together and say, yeah, these are things that we want to do, right? We want to deploy on the Microsoft campus. Now, the question becomes, how do you actually do it? And what do you do at the edge? And what do you do in the cloud, right? By the way, before I forget one thing, the Cone Resnick ad was fantastic, right? Healthy buildings. That's something that we are very, very interested in, right? That's another thing. But the question is, how do we support all these things, right? Maybe I'll just take one or two examples of how we are doing our, we haven't, this is still an early POC, but here are some thoughts on how we are planning to address those kind of things, right? At a conceptual level. If you take a look at healthy buildings today, one of the challenges that I think exists in the industry is just data, but nothing being done with the data. All right. So what do I mean by that? Everybody's putting up IAQ sensors in their office, right? Having dashboards, right? That's all great. But, if I see red on a dashboard, we care a lot about employee experience at Microsoft, right? That is, our employees are the asset of the company. We want to make sure that they're healthy, they're productive. It's just, we want to deliver awesome, experience for them. So one of the around is, well, we have this data, right? And how do we go about doing something with that data? And that's where the edge actually becomes very interesting, because IAQ information is fairly discrete and small, right? CO2 values, PM 2.5 values, all that is small. It's not large compute. You do not have to send it to the cloud, right? Once I have it at the edge, it's a perfect example of, can I actuate something on the building assets to actually deliver a better experience for our employees? So that's a great example of how the edge can be utilized. Now, another thing is around security, right? Today, the big problem in the industry is there is no single pane of glass, right? There's no way for most portfolios would you have the capability of really not just monitoring your infrastructure, in which some cases, some customers do. I still would argue that it's a subset, but in some cases they do. But majority of them don't actually are able to patch their infrastructure, which is a big deal. I mean, we know for a fact that unpatched infrastructure leads to cyber events. I mean, it's a very positive correlation.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things that we're looking at. Now, that's a perfect example of having both a cloud component and the edge component. What does the cloud component do? The cloud component gives you that single pane of glass. It gives you that entry point for patching. It gives you the ability to do workflow, right? It does all these things. Cloud is great. You know, when we say edge computing, we are not saying without the cloud. The cloud is an intrinsic part of this, right? It is a tight, actually, coupling for cloud to edge. Now, but if you wanted to really patch the infrastructure, in most cases, you couldn't do it directly from the cloud. You would need that edge component to actually push those updates to your infrastructure. So those are two examples of how we believe that in some cases it could be edge, in some cases it would have to be edge and cloud. In other cases, it would be completely cloud.
You know, I know Azure IoT. I'm just going to a little push for Azure IoT is, you know, has been designed and is actually solving, you know, some of these huge issues. For instance, I know there's been a huge initiative to build a consortium on ontology and taxonomy for for smart building assets. How close are we to solving and making the onboarding process easier and more seamless? I mean, because that's the elephant that you got to push up the hill. And often is the thing that really slows down or impacts the cost benefits of a smart building program. Are we making progress on that?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, again, your reading of the industry is so amazing. I mean, you guys not only interact, but I think you synthesize some of the problems, and that's the value, honestly, of engaging in this community. Yes, the answer to that is yes. RecCore is an ontology that is based that we are bundling with ADT, and yes, it provides that categorization, that standardization of data, of building data, right? And people will argue that there are other, ways to do it. Yes, absolutely. I don't deny it. Given the fact that it is somewhat tied to the ADT story, I think it becomes very compelling, right? Because ADT gives that capability for people to really have that entire data in one data store with regards to the building. That being said, there are other types of vendor software that enables the classification of data into this ontology. And while we are not a proponent of one vendor or the other, the Microsoft GWS prides itself on the fact that we work with a host of vendors, but it's absolutely an area where people need to invest the calories, because if you could classify your building in a fraction of amount of time, again, it becomes a time to value story. You get your data faster in a more standardized format that now you can take actions on, and that's very compelling. Before we transition off the Azure story, though, I must say Azure is more than just IoT Hub or ADT or the RecCore, but it has a lot of components, both in the cloud and at the edge, that enable this journey of creating a solution for smart buildings very, very easy and very compelling. And we are at Microsoft AWS, obviously, will work with the Microsoft Azure platform seamlessly. And we are leveraging those kind of things, whether it be IoT Hub, Azure Key Vault, Azure Update Services, the list goes on, Edge Hub, Edge Agent. It's endless, but I mean, that's the fun part of the job, right? Of not only solving a problem, but solving with Microsoft Azure components.
Yep. Well, unfortunately, this time has gone quickly, and we're out of time now. But I just got to tell you, as usual, Srini, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for spending time with us today. And I'd like to keep the door open, maybe to have you on the show again sometime. I know we'll see you at the conference.
Absolutely, we'll miss it.
These conversations and some of these great stories that are coming out of Microsoft.
I look forward to seeing the smart building community and my friends. I think one thing powerful you said was about the friendship, right? I mean, yeah, we do have professional relationships, but I would count some of my closest friends also from the community. So it's always a pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about this topic. I think it's something that we should discuss definitely further in detail at the conference. And I think it has true business benefit whenever you talk about not just a technology idea, but the business idea behind it. It becomes very compelling. And, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's great seeing you. So with that, we're going to be moving on to the news with my partner, Lisa Woods, who's going to be filling in for me this week. Hey, Lisa, what's going on in the news today?
Hey, Howard. That was a great conversation with Srini. I tell you what, he's such a smart guy. I really like hearing him, talking to him. So as you know by now, every Thursday, we send out our weekly briefing newsletter of the top stories touching commercial and corporate real estate and technology. And then this news segment, we highlight a few of those articles that we think are especially significant. So our lead article this week is about office occupancy and energy use. You would think that since commercial office buildings saw occupancy drop 80 to 90% last year, and for retail and restaurant space, that number was almost zero for several months, that we would have seen similar reductions in energy use during that period, right? Well, while office building occupancy dropped off the proverbial cliff, energy use only fell by about 10 to 15%. The article points to a number of factors that contributed to this, such as design. Buildings weren't designed to be empty. They were designed for full or near full occupancy, and building systems were programmed to support occupied spaces, not unoccupied spaces. On the operations side, the abrupt shift to remote work caught most facilities teams off guard. So computers, monitors, printers, servers were all left as is when office staff left the building. Lighting, cooling, and ventilation systems were left running on normal work week schedules for months before anyone intervened to make adjustments. What I thought was the most interesting factor was around leasing requirements. So tenant leases stipulate the daily schedules and required HVAC that have to be provided in a tenant space, and landlords can't deviate from these requirements without a direct request or at least consent from the tenant. So landlords found themselves in a catch-22 because a lot of the tenants were looking for rent relief, but if landlords let temperatures drift out of the typical occupied comfort zones or ventilation drop to after hours rates during the workday, tenants could use this as leverage to get out of paying their rent. This is a really interesting article and well worth the 5-minute read, so be sure to check that out. Our second article is provided by our technology partner, Real Foundations. Emily Fuller, who's the Senior Manager for Application Services, has written a great piece on strengthening a real estate company's ERP solution and provides a comprehensive set of pros and cons to the various approaches to the administrative, technical, and operational support required for the solution and its end users. If outsourcing ERP support is under consideration, the article also contains important information about managed services firms and the questions that a real estate company should ask to ensure that they find the right fit for their organization. Now, on the JV and acquisition front in the news this week, The Real Deal reports that MSCI is set to acquire commercial real estate data provider Real Capital Analytics for $950 million. Through this deal, MSCI will gain access to Real Capital Analytics database, which is more than 20 trillion in commercial property transactions. Modern Ventures is in the news this week, closing its second fund with $200 million, which they will use to fund startups in and around real estate, finance, insurance, and home services. And finally, Hudson Pacific Properties and Blackstone Group are planning a nearly $200 million production studio complex, which would be the second such development in their joint venture. Now, this is a 240,000 square foot project and is slated to include 7 sound stages, offices, and other space on a spread of about 10 acres. They expect to have the complex completed by third quarter of 2023. There are several other very interesting technology articles in this week's newsletter, but that's all the time I have. So grab the email that went out yesterday or visit us at realcomm.com and click on the news link. So Howard, I will turn it back over to you.
Thanks for the news, Lise. That was great. Great job. Good seeing you on the show today. So I just want to say thank you, Lisa, Nancy, and team for another great show. Now, next week, Jim's going to be back. We'll be showcasing a revolutionary smart building project in Austin. We're going to have 2 real estate executives who are literally rewriting the textbook on envisioning, designing, executing a high-performance, energy-efficient, sustainable, smart, connected, rich, tenant experienced, focused office building. Don't miss the show next week. So with that, I'd like to say thanks to all of you for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you again next Friday at Realcomm Live.